Everyone, welcome back to the second session of our legislative conference. We look forward to a good conversation this time. We've got some representatives and senators to come in and speak with us. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everybody this is your chance to visit with these people and to ask them your questions, especially for you people that are signed on here that don't normally get a chance to go back to DC and see these people and get to have face-to-face with them. These virtual meetings we're getting better at them. We're learning to use them. The one positive is that they do reach out and allow people in the country that are busy working or taking care of the family an opportunity to hear it and have a conversation with the agency people and the representatives. So please take advantage of it. In this section, we're going to be visited by some new members in Congress: Representative Cliff Bentz of Oregon, Representative Blake Moore of Utah, and Representative Jay Obornotti of California. They'll join us to discuss their experience during the opening months of the 117th Congress. We look forward to this. Will include their insights into the dynamics and the priorities of key House and Senate committees, and how the federal land ranchers can be most effective as advocates for the industry. We're happy also to welcome Senator John Hoeven, a longtime advocate for public land ranching and issues from North Dakota. And he'll provide his perspective, not as a new member, but as a longtime member in the Senate, and share with us some of what he's facing in the new challenges in defining the balance of power and what it looks like with this 50-50 split. Representative Jay Obornotti serves as a representative from California's 8th District. He is born in Chicago, grew up in the Central Valley, the city of Fresno, and served as a city council member and mayor of Big Bear Lake before becoming elected into the California Assembly. The representative serves on the House Budget Committee, the House Natural Resource Committee, where he's vice ranking member of the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples of the United States, and a member of the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. Congressman, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
And Nels, I think we're going to have to give the congressman just one moment or two, and I'm going to make excuses for him and perhaps set up some of his remarks for him this morning. As we know, members of Congress, part of the reason that we have the 4 members joining us today that we do is because they're members of important subcommittees and committees that affect our industry. Mr. Obornotti is a member of the Natural Resources Committee, as is Representative Moore, and Cliff Bentz is as well. And all 3 of them, I don't have my television on here in the background, but I think all 3 of them are sitting in one of 2 public lands hearings this morning. And the House Natural Resources Committee met this morning at 10 o'clock, which is just about 2 hours ago, to talk a little bit about what the president's agenda looks like, this Build Back Better ethos and campaign that the administration and the president have undertaken. And so Congress is providing some oversight and hearing from the administration and from the public about what that Build Back Better proposal means for a variety of things: rural broadband, for forestry, for water, for urban communities. But the House Natural Resources Committee is having a subcommittee hearing this morning on what that Build Back Better proposal and what that campaign looks like for public lands. And so we're going to have him join us here in just a few moments to talk about his perspective, and not only as a new member, but as a new member of this committee, but also how this hearing went and what that looks like from a committee perspective. we have a long history of interaction with this committee and others as well about advancing those rural priorities and making sure, like Representative Newhouse and Senator Dane said this morning, making sure that those rural priorities are heard in Congress. You know, as we're talking about this morning, as we're waiting for him to join us, you know, these are the kind of things, that big priorities slide that we saw this morning. These are the kind of things that are likely to be discussed in the Natural Resources Committee. So now I'm going to put myself back on mute. I see that Representative Obernolte has joined us, and we are so pleased to welcome him here.
Well, good morning, everyone. Might be afternoon now for you. It's still morning for me. It's a pleasure to see everyone, and happy to be here today, and very happy to be serving in Congress and serving as a member of the Natural Resources Committee. I thought I'd talk a little bit this morning about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is forest resiliency, good forest management practices, and the need to protect against catastrophic wildfires. And this is particularly important to me because the district that I represent, believe it or not, is over 90% public lands. It's one of the most intense public lands concentrations in the entire country. And that creates some very unique challenges for us. In fact, the place that I live, the city of Big Bear Lake, is one of the only communities in the entire United States that's completely surrounded by national forest. So when we have wildfire problems, those wildfires are likely to be severe and catastrophic. And it's something I've experienced personally myself. I've been, in the time that I've lived here, I've been evacuated because a wildfire was nearby 3 times. And it's been worse for other people. I remember several years ago, we had the catastrophic Camp Fire that completely destroyed the town of Paradise. And I had the opportunity to go tour that devastation right after it happened. And I will tell you, if you ever actually get the opportunity to do that, I definitely would encourage you to. It will really open your eyes as to how big our catastrophic wildfire problem has gotten and the potential for loss of life and destruction. That was the most destructive wildfire in California state history, destroyed hundreds of structures, and over 30 lives were lost just because of the severity of the fire. And if you want to imagine this, there were people in the town that the fire swept in so suddenly. There were people in the town who sheltered in place in their vehicles in the middle of intersections in the streets because that was the furthest away that they could get from the flames. That's how quickly the fire went through there. And the reason why this is such an important topic for me is that, you know, we continue to have in the West this problem with catastrophic wildfires. Last year in California was the worst year in our state's history for wildfires. We had over 4 million acres of our state burn. And that's unfortunately going to be our reality until we can get our arms around not just eliminating some of the climate-related factors that are causing these fires, but also to get to a place where we're better managing our public lands and our national forest. So, and that's something that I really wanted to talk about today because there's been some recent actions in Congress that I think has kind of moved us in the wrong direction there. As I think most of you are aware, Congress recently passed a large public lands bill. And this is something that I opposed because of a provision in there that reclassified 1.5 million acres in the West as wilderness areas. And you know, we can, I think we need to have a discussion as a society about what exactly our intent is with respect to the management of public lands. I believe it's possible to be a conservationist without being a preservationist. And the thing about a wilderness designation is it's very restrictive in what we can then do to manage those forested areas. Being a wilderness means there can't be any roads, there can't be even any motorized vehicles, and there can't be hardly any fuel reduction. The BLM manual for the management of wilderness areas says that fuels reduction is permitted in wilderness areas only under extremely rare circumstances. And I have a big problem with that because one of the things that I remember vividly about my trip to Paradise is there was a road that went through one section of town, and on one side of the road was a section of forest that had been recently thinned, and on the other side of the road was a section of forest that had not been thinned. And the difference standing on the road was stark. The portion of the forest that had not been thinned was burned all the way down to the ground because the fire there had gone up into the crown of the trees and had been much hotter and much more intense. Whereas on the portion of the forest that had been thinned, the crown of the trees were intact, the trees were still alive, and all of the understory had burned away. So, I mean, that's a stark reminder to me about how important fuels reduction is. And so I'm very concerned that we're not allowing that to be done in wilderness areas. In the past few years, we've had over 7 million acres of wilderness in the United States burned. And so this is something that's going to become more and more of a prevalent topic. Also, talking about the subject of fuels reduction, I think we have to talk about the importance of grazing. That is a kind of a multidisciplinary use of the land that has the ancillary benefit of reducing the amount of fuels that are available to be consumed and add intensity to a wildfire. And that's something else that we don't allow to be done in wilderness areas and a lot of different areas that the federal government manages. So, I think we really need to sit down as a society and talk about what good forest management means. And talk about the fact that we all share a goal of preserving our forest, but that means being good stewards of that forest, and to talk about what it means to be a good steward, what it means to protect and preserve the forest that we're entrusted with. So that's what I wanted to say to you this morning. I've left a few minutes here at the end for question and answer. I'd be happy to take any questions about anything I said or anything else that's going on with respect to wildlands in Congress.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and your comments on not only forest management but on fuels reduction are really well timed. We actually have quite a number of California members on this morning who not only have experienced catastrophic wildfires over the last decade, but acutely in the last year or two as well. And these effects truly are catastrophic, but they're also deeply personal. And so your commitment to those issues and your commitment to improving forest management for all land users and land health is really appreciated. We have a question coming through. Let's see who is up first. We have actually one of your constituents, Dave Daly, who is one of those where a fire has been quite close to his operation. I think we have Dave unmuted.
Thank you, Congressman Obernolte. This is Dave Daly up from Butte County. So very close to the campfire that you toured. And also we suffered in the North Complex fire, which destroyed our cow herd in the town of Berry Creek. So we understand it. I appreciate your comments. They're right on. We need to do something on fuels reduction. I'd also like to draw your attention to your folks down there in the Creek Fire by Yosemite, who are really struggling with the Forest Service and what they may do this coming year, even allowing those people to return to their permits and their allotments. They've been active. They're working with their board of supervisors. They're trying to get support, and they have from public lands and from California cattlemen. But we would really appreciate anything you can do in helping us engage with the Forest Service on those permittees. I think they're a little bit north of your district, but they're pretty close as they work in that kind of Madera, Fresno County area. So thanks for your comments on fire. If you can help them with the Forest Service, that's much appreciated.
Sure, certainly happy to help. They've got good representation there in Butte County as well. And we all kind of, the California delegation, we stick together, we work together. And yeah, happy to help in any way I can.
I think our next question comes from one of your neighbors in Nevada. Joe Guild, can you unmute, please? Just give it just a moment. Let's see. Well, we'll come back to Joe. We're having a little bit of technical issues this morning, but one of the issues that's coming into the chat here is really about the dynamic in that House Natural Resources Committee. I know that you had a hearing this morning. We talked about it a little bit before you joined us about the Build Back Better proposal and how public lands, how federal lands can be involved in that proposal. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that hearing went this morning and what some of your priorities are as this campaign, this presidential lens moves forward?
Sure. You know, the Natural Resources Committee is one obviously I'm new to since this is my freshman year in Congress, but is one that I'm really enjoying serving on. I think that there is a very bipartisan atmosphere and a shared concern for protecting our natural resources while at the same time being good stewards of our public lands. So the hearing this morning, and actually this is one of 2 hearings we're having in natural resources today, but the hearing this morning, as you say, is on the initiative to Build Back Better. And I think that really we're discussing what it means to build back and what does better mean. And I think that there is growing bipartisan consensus that being good stewards of land does not mean walling the public lands off from any kind of public use. And a realization that we as a society in doing that have actually been influencing the degradation of those lands in a lot of different ways, because nothing that man does is without environmental consequence. And that includes walling off lands and trying to prevent natural fires from going through them, trying to prevent any kind of entry into those lands. I think that has a negative environmental consequence too. And I think we all as a committee are beginning to realize that.
I think that's a great point. And when we talk about public lands and that access is such an important component, later in the agenda today, we're going to hear from several different members of a panel talking about multiple use and talking about how these variety of permitted uses can have access to these landscapes in a really productive and complementary way. You are uniquely positioned to talk about multiple use and the question of use of these lands. And what that balance looks like, being from a highly recreational community. How does your personal experience with recreation and balancing forest management and other attributes of land use, how does that impact the way you go in and your mindset going into the Natural Resources Committee hearings?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's something that we often as a society disagree on. Because when we talk about multiple use, sometimes people can see a use like such as ranching, as a beneficial use because you've got the grazing and, you're producing something, you're producing, beef or you're producing milk. And, you have the ancillary benefit of thinning that goes on. So sometimes people will look at grazing and say, okay, well, that's a multiple use that I agree with. But then they look at recreational uses and say, that's a use that that one might not agree with because, that you don't have an ancillary societal benefit. But I think also that ignores the fact, of a couple things. First of all, these are public lands. That means they belong to all of us. And walling off the public lands is basically a way of saying, although these lands are public, we're not going to allow the public onto them, which I think is fraught with moral peril, right? But also, if you look at communities like the off-highway vehicle community, which is one of the most active communities in the district that I represent, you will not find more ardent environmentalists than within the OHV community. And if you want to get into bad trouble, go into my district and treat public lands disrespectfully in the presence of some of those people, because they are fervently dedicated to the good management of those lands, for respect for those lands, and for treating it respectfully when they come onto those lands and when they leave those lands. And you don't, if you deny those people access to those lands, you lose one of the most ardent supporters of the preservation of those lands. And so I think when we ignore those communities and we ignore recreational uses, we also lose the benefit of that really, really engaged and active community.
I think that's a good point, and especially probably encouraging to some of our attendees. Had several conference calls. It's only Tuesday, but conference calls over the weekend and yesterday about some of the OHV damage in other areas where grazing and OHV use and other kinds of recreation and wildlife habitat all intersect. And so I think you can count on our attendees to work with you and our community to work with you to figure out why it works so well in your area, to figure out how that balance can be created and then replicated across, because we do, you know, we all want healthy landscapes. We all want we all want that good balance and that productive balance and healthy landscapes. But sometimes that's harder to do than others. So that's encouraging, and thank you for sharing that this morning. I'll turn it over. If there are any other questions, you can ask a question in the Q&A or in the chat. And otherwise, I will turn it over to our Vice President, Mark Rober, who has also faced this question of multiple use in his home state of Colorado.
Galen, thank you, Congressman Obernolte. It's refreshing to hear perspective that kind of true to my heart is, you know, true working lands take working hands. And I appreciate your perspective on that. Do we have any other questions? Don't see any hands raised, any chat going on. So I guess, like I say, we appreciate work you're doing and keep it up, and let us know any way that we can be of help to you in helping to spread better management throughout the West, to where we aren't just a big fire waiting to happen. So
right. Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I think that these types of conversations are what is key to promoting better management of public lands. You know, and talking about multiple use in general, I think the key components of good management are planning and education. Right. So planning, where we all sit down together, all of the various use communities of these lands, talk about, you know, what the dangers are. I mean, OHV in particular, talk about, you know, where the sensitive areas are, where the environmentally sensitive areas aren't, and then education, you know, spreading the word about what is being done, what good forest management means, and what that means for everyone in terms of our approach to management of those lands. So I want to thank you very much for everyone here for being part of that discussion. It was an honor to be here today.
thank you again, Congressman. So with that, we will move on to our next speaker, and that is Blake Moore. He's a proactive problem solver from Ogden, Utah, committed to representing each and every constituent of Utah's 1st District. He is dedicated to reflecting Utah's values in Congress and finding solutions to the challenges facing the district and the state. Before being elected to Congress, Blake worked for small business and in the Foreign Service, experiences that now guide his work on domestic and foreign policy. This experience taught him to take seriously the United States diplomatic apparatus, the readiness of the armed forces, and the nation's commitment to strengthening partnerships and alliances across the globe. Do we have, is Congressman Moore joined us yet?
Yes, he has. I think we're waiting to unmute.
Love the Zoom world, don't you?
You do love it. In person, this would be the pass the microphone. You're waiting for someone to walk around the crowd to pass the microphone, and you know, either you're weaving through chairs or starting that discussion. But as we're waiting for the technology to catch up with the times, I have to say how pleased I am, Mark, to just looking at our list of attendees this morning. I think we have all 4 time zones in the country, at least the contiguous US. I think we have all 4 of them represented. We have folks obviously from California and Washington and Oregon on Pacific time, of course us here in DC on Eastern time, but we have, I just got a text message from someone in Minnesota who's joined us. We have folks from just all over, and I have to say I'm so pleased to see so many producers taking, you know, an hour or two out of their day to join us. Especially as we hear from such esteemed members like Representative Moore. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, and we'll go ahead and give you the floor. We already did your intro. Unfortunately, you didn't hear it, I guess, but we won't go back through it. It was a good intro, so you'll have to take our word for it, but the floor is yours. Go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I caught the very last end of it and I heard the word esteemed, so I figured you weren't talking about me. So I wasn't necessarily sure if I should jump in or not. Yes. I actually have some prepared remarks, and I oftentimes like to be, you know, more conversational. But I think it's important. I'd like to get through some of the things that we have prepared from, you know, my experience over the last few months, my committee assignments, and some of the work that we're doing, and hope to be able to interact in a more casual manner at some point in the near future, and maybe even face-to-face at some point. So let me go ahead and just spend a few minutes going over some of these remarks, and then at that point we'll go from there. But thanks for the opportunity to address the group today, and I'm really grateful for this, to be here virtually with you all. It's an honor to address the Public Lands Council, which for decades has been fighting to represent our nation's critically important cattle and sheep ranchers. To provide some background on who I am and why I ran for Congress, I was born and raised in Ogden, Utah, and developed a deep appreciation for the Northern Utah community. I was inspired by my teachers, coaches, and mentors who committed themselves to serving their neighbors and community at large, and that passion for service stuck with me. After serving a mission for my faith in South Korea, I graduated from the University of Utah and later got a master's in public policy and administration from Northwestern University. I lived and worked in Southeast Asia, served in the Foreign Service, and as part of my work in the intelligence and defense community, I got a real opportunity to sort of serve our country, always in a civilian role, but get a chance to see the inner workings of a big DC government bureaucracy, living and working kind of under a DoD budget. The part of that was my pitch to also come back and serve in this capacity. But after the first portion of my career serving in that way, I moved back to Utah to work for a Cicero Group, a management consulting firm. These professional experiences allowed me to learn how organizations can best solve complex problems, and a skill that representatives in Congress literally need now more than ever. My wife and I have 3 amazing boys, very active and energetic. They're 8, 5, and 5. They keep us on our toes. Their names are Max, George, and Winston. And my role in Congress keeps me busy, but like I was able to last night, just as many Little League games as possible. So I'm gonna, it's been a very busy quarter, a very tumultuous quarter back in Washington, and through it all, we're gonna make sure that we stay grounded in those family principles that many of you find so near and dear, and what's near and dear to our lives. I ran for Congress because I see a need for strong conservative leadership in Washington, specifically leadership that is focused on building trust across the aisle to achieve productive and bipartisan results. I've already seen that the more time we spend villainizing those who disagree with us, the more we stall progress on doing the important work at hand and actually serving our constituents like you all. We have an important work to do, from national monument designations to protecting the principle of multiple use management, to water issues, to wildlife prevention, to fighting restrictive grazing regulation. The list goes on and on. This is why I'm excited to get going on my priorities for this Congress. I was thrilled to be assigned to the Natural Resources Committee. We worked very, very hard to get that assignment, which allows me to represent the First District's key interests, such as the challenges and opportunities posed by Utah's expansive federally owned lands. I represent some of the most scenic places in our country, and many of my colleagues know that. I love talking about what the First District and Utah in general provides, and many people recognize that. And but not only do we have these beautiful ski areas and rapidly growing urban centers, military assets, but also contains vast swaths of land that are important resources for cattle and sheep ranchers like yourselves. The work you do plays an incredibly important role in our country. Not only do you help drive economic development in the rural parts of our country, notably in Utah, but grazing is also a win-win scenario for our environment. And I continue to try to make that point and beat that and really pound that point home on any type of committee hearing. And today was no different, as I just came over from a committee hearing where we talked about the benefits of multi-use and grazing. But people just fail to grasp it sometimes, and it doesn't dominate the conversation like I hope it to, and what I'll continue to work to make sure that it does. In recent years, we have seen environmental groups come after grazers by arguing that grazing destroys ecosystems, but nothing could be further from the truth. Successful livestock operations improve both our ecological and economic systems. Grazing helps to spur the life cycle of perennial grasses, capture carbon, and increase the rate of sequestration, and even reduce the risk posed by wildfires. As conversations about climate change intensify, we cannot ignore the benefits that grazing plays in mitigating these threats. In addition, we must also enforce that federal agencies do not pursue priorities that undercut the work you do. In order to prevent federal infringement on water rights, which is a state issue, I have co-sponsored the Western Water Security Act. America's ranchers should never live in fear that the federal government will seize control of private water rights. The same can be said for preventing our federal agencies from replacing grazing opportunities with wildlife habitat status. These are basic principles of good governance, and something I hope Republicans and Democrats will be able to agree on in the 117th Congress. Such bipartisan cooperation is only possible if both sides are able to identify a common problem. On many policy issues, the two parties are unable to agree on a root cause to the challenges we face. But one area of consensus is immigration reform. As I traveled throughout Utah during my campaign, and as I travel it now as a representative, I've been told over and over again that we are facing a critical labor shortage in the agricultural industry. This shortage has led to skyrocketing and destabilizing wage growth in Utah and has challenged farmers and ranchers who are trying to fill their job vacancies. There is room for agreement on this, and it is essential that Congress and stakeholders come together to work out a compromise that allows the agricultural industry to thrive. I wholeheartedly believe we are up to it. Just last week, I joined with a number of my colleagues in rolling out an immigration reform that can unite Republicans and Democrats. It promises to streamline our visa system, bolster the agriculture workforce, and enhance border security. Over the coming weeks and months, we will be working hard to advance this important initiative through Congress. Unfortunately, though, not every issue promises to be so bipartisan. The debate over land designations has been raging for decades. This is something that you all know. The significant percentage of land owned by the federal government in Western states is something that many of our colleagues in more coastal states just don't fully know about or understand. The Endangered Species Act, the Antiquities Act, the Wilderness Act, and Free Range Roaming Horses and Burros Act are all examples of how federal laws, when abused, can make our lives more difficult. As legislators, we must do a better job ensuring that stakeholders are brought to the table on management decisions. Given my background in management consulting, I have learned a great deal about how to help people and organizations overcome obstacles and find solutions. And this is exactly how I intend to approach my position on the Natural Resources Committee. Solving these important issues requires a sincere willingness to work together. It's how our system was designed to work, and we can right now see what happens when it doesn't. As Congress increasingly cedes power to the executive branch, huge sectors of our economy fall victim to regulatory landscape that seems to change dramatically with each new administration. This is the wrong way to govern, and addressing this is one of my top priorities. We have the capacity to solve these problems. I really do believe it, despite all of the rhetoric and everything that goes on. I really do believe that we can solve these problems. And over the past few months, I've been hard at work building a lane in which I can bring Republicans and Democrats together to get work done. It's not easy, brand new freshman, but when I talk about building a lane, you know, it's just a way that, you know, finding relationships and reaching out and just trying to be almost human in a way, to be able to continue that dialogue. And I'm hopeful that this will kind of take root and continue to have, you know, some positive impact going forward. But I do understand it's not going to be easy. I'm under no illusion that will be easy. But I am optimistic, and I'll remain optimistic because I believe that's my job. So I got through a lot of that. There's a lot in there that could definitely be expounded upon. But I just wanted to end by saying thank you to the Public Lands Council for inviting me to share some of these thoughts. Thanks for the work that you all are doing. The way that you're approaching these issues and the reality that exists for you all actually really helps me communicate this to folks back in Washington. We care about our environment. We care about our livelihoods. These don't have to be at odds, and the work that you all are doing is so important. And I'm striving to just be a good representative of that. And you know, just securing our nation's food and fiber supply is at our, you know, top of my priority. So let me pause there and just again finish with saying thank you and appreciate the chance to be here.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Moore, for joining us. And I'm going to return your thanks. You have been such a communicative and active and really positive and engaging new member of this freshman class. And I can't thank you enough for your level of engagement with us and our producers, while acknowledging that they're, especially given your given the dynamics in the House. You know, this morning we talked a little bit about what that majority and what that margin looks like. Acknowledging that there needs to be bipartisan support, bipartisan work on some of these issues in order to make true progress, real progress on some of these fronts. Highlight just for a moment, you know, we just heard from Representative Obernolte, heard from yourself as well. You two served together on the Natural Resources Committee, and the year, you know, your first hearing with them, the organizational hearing, got a little bit of some distraction, perhaps. It was one of the more interesting organizational meetings that I've ever seen. But the things have moved on from there. Can you, we asked Representative Obernolte to do the same, but can you give us a little bit of feedback on how this morning's hearings went and what you've seen emerging from this committee, other than HR 803, which is you know, it is what it is. It's purely messaging. What other themes have you seen coming out of this committee so far?
You know, today was actually quite encouraging. We can obviously build on the first committee hearing always and do much better at just, you know, in our communication. But there was a lot of moments that, you know, there was a lot of moments of agreement, and I'll mention even Representative Obernolte, a good friend of mine, very, very talented, very smart individual, thoughtful. You know, his questioning to the expert he was focused on was, you know, came to agreement on things. And there does seem to be a general sense of, yes, there is balance here. There needs to be balance. That's not what we've seen with executive action in this first few months. And so I'm just hoping that we can keep that theme going and highlighting the good work that is being done. The fact that Utahns in particular, we care about our environment. We care deeply about our beautiful landscapes, and we're not in the interest of destroying that in any way, shape, or form. We have, you know, and we just need to be able to find that balance. Today, I couldn't. You could have. There was several moments from the chairman down. You know, yeah, we agree on that. We agree on that. We agree on that. There is that. There it exists. It's just when you have a bill like 803 go through, that, you know, 35% of the Republican committee group, so is new freshmen, new folks with a new perspective, you know, and a willingness to engage. And then when 803 goes through without any committee or markup or anything like that, that's just what you've seen. And I think this first quarter, with getting everything to the floor without any real committee work that's being done across the board on whatever topic you want to do, it's just been an onslaught of legislation that's just been pushed through. You don't solve any of this when you're on the House floor. I mean, that's probably my big takeaway, is the debates that go on the House floor there's like 14 people there listening. None of it's really productive. Most of it's for clips and grandstanding on every side of the aisle here. You can't do this work unless there's good, sound committee work, time, process to go through. Now that the first quarter is over and from what I understand, you know, the McGovern rule that allowed for this to take place through April 1st, that now that that's winding down, I hope to get back to some sense of normalcy. And I think we saw that today with like, okay, look, yes, we do need to XYZ, but we also have to balance it with this. And you have a governor from Idaho on there speaking about the importance of managing lands for wildfires, and, you know, taking an approach that you see often. It's just not the best way. So I'm hopeful. Again, I'll remain optimistic, Caitlin, as you've seen from me over the last little while, and we'll keep kind of pushing for that.
No, that's great. And I know that some of our Idahoans were watching that committee hearing this morning. Governor Little not only is governor of Idaho, but is also a longtime member of the Public Lands Council as well. And so his advocacy on wildfire, on some of these forage management issues is so important. I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. You know, there's one of the questions that's coming in is just about your experience in the defense space, in the security space. And dealing with some of those budget issues. A lot of those budget issues exist as well in the wildfire space and in forestry. You know, what sort of conversations or what sort of suggestions do you have so far about improvements to making sure that not only are we managing these forests better on the front end, but also making sure that we're not accruing that cost for catastrophic wildfires on the back end? It's a very expensive process, but in terms of preparation versus reaction, can you just talk a little bit about your experience there?
This is why John Curtis and Joe Neguse are co-chairing the Bipartisan Wildfire Commission. You see this affect left-leaning states like California. You see it affect Utah and Idaho. Like, it's something that should not be bogged down in grandstanding partisanship. So I'm on that committee. We haven't had, and to my knowledge, haven't any meetings yet, but I think that it's at least a good sign that there's a bipartisan group with two really good individuals, right? Like John Curtis and Joe Neguse. They're thoughtful. They're going to disagree on things, but there has to be, and there was discussion on the committee hearing today. So that's the entire purpose of it, is to get out ahead of it. And not only just the economic cost, but the release of carbon dioxide. Like, you have to leverage those sort of like folks, we're all doing the same thing here. We're all trying to achieve the same thing. And let's look at this. Let's look at the case studies of what's happened. I have people lining up in Utah ready to show how, you know, state managed forest area have been able to, you know, with grazing, with logging, using that as a way to improve, you know, when wildfires rear their ugly head, and how much better we can do. I want to be a body of Congress that will take past data and apply it to the future. If you can do that, there's so many different problems we can solve, and this is specifically one of them. And I know that the folks in some of these areas in Utah and throughout the first district, they would be the first ones to sign on to a committee hearing or anything to provide sort of their best practices.
I think that you make a great point that I'm going to put a little bit of a finer edge on here. Your district, the district that you represent, is a very active district. It's very accustomed. You know, your predecessor had a lot of experience and spent a lot of time on the Natural Resources Committee. Things from, you know, poor management of wild horses and burros to best use and use and delegation of authorities to the grazing improvement boards and the grazing improvement districts. You hear a lot from them. And what is, you know, what's the issue that you're hearing most from them about? And is it something that that was unexpected for you?
Yeah, I would say Representative Hsu from the northeastern part of the state. He recently submitted a question to a town hall that I had done, and it was entirely about multi-use, right? I mean, I think it's summed up best when you say this is not, the solution cannot be rooted in in one interest area or one industry. Like there has to be a broad approach to how you go about addressing this, making sure multi-use opportunities exist is critically important. We too often, and I'll just say it, the decision makers in our society, and I live in the Wasatch Front, to those of you in Utah here, the urban area, like we reap a lot of benefit from our urban areas, from our rural areas, and they don't get the recognition that it's needed. The time you go and, the basic fundamentals of life come from most times our rural areas, and they simply just don't have a say in the policy decisions enough. And you see that in Washington as well. And it's the multi-use concept that gets missed and misinterpreted so often. And it's and I hear it from county commissioners in these rural areas that they never leave out the environment. They never leave out recreation and trying to bulk up that. And they are more than willing to find new opportunities in cleaner energy technology and everything like that. Everybody's open to whatever is best for our globe and for our local communities, right? But it's that concept of multiple use that I think kind of drives the conversation.
I think you're absolutely right. And we have a variety of members. I'm, again, just sort of looking at our attendee list today. We have a variety of members, quite a few of whom who are probably neighbors of yours, who raise sheep and cattle on these public lands and defend this multiple use. And as we're inevitably going to have to talk about monuments, as we're inevitably going to have to talk about some of these things that have historically been antithetical to multiple use and that multiple use management, I can guarantee that you're going to be hearing from them as well. We've gone through all of the questions that are in the chat so far.
Let me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just on the monuments as well. Bears Ears is going to be the big topic right now. We had a win. It was a small win, but it's an awesome win. And Secretary Holland's is going to come out to Utah. She's committed to come out to Utah before making a decision on what they will do there. A legislative option is something that I know that the Utah delegation is committed to. I'm personally committed to it, and will use my spot on the Natural Resources Committee however I can to be productive in that space. And so I'm really looking forward to, it was exciting to be a part of that. When we got word, they reached out to our office, said, hey, we've made a decision, we're going to organize a visit. There's a lot of good that can come out of that, right? So it's finding those unique circumstances where something really positive happens and recognizing that, we can still work together, even though it's been a crazy quarter.
That it has. I actually have a question for you coming in from Joe Guild, one of your neighbors in Nevada. Joe, you're unmuted.
I thought I'm unmuted.
You did. You're ready to talk.
Well, okay, good. Congressman, good morning. I'm Joe Guild from Nevada. And I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball, but you mentioned Bears Ears. And actually, Caitlin and I have had recent discussions about the 30 by 2030 effort. And I don't know if it comes before the committee that you're on, but you're from the West, and I know you understand some of this stuff, but I've done the math on this, and I don't hear people talking about the numbers, nor do I hear anybody talking about what actually protection of this 30% of this nation's land actually means. But here's a quick math lesson. There's 1.9 billion acres of land in the continental United States. 30% of that is roughly 600 million acres. You take 3 agencies of the US government, the Park Service, the BLM and the Forest Service, and they manage about 515 million acres. If you add the Department of Defense, Indian reservations, Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, you get way close to 700 million acres of land that's managed or controlled by the US government. So, and if you own and control something, the human nature that we all have, our character is to protect the land that we own and control, or the things that we own and control. So nobody's talking about what this means. Are we going to add 30% to what's already been owned and controlled? What does protection actually mean? You know, if you're managing a Fish and Wildlife Service, if you're managing, you know, something controlled by the Fish and Wildlife Service, you're protecting the animals that occupy that refuge. So, and I don't know if this is even a question, Congressman, but in the conversation, I hope that people like you who understand what I'm talking about, and our own Congressman Amodei, frankly, our own Senator Cortez Mastos from Nevada understands some of these numbers, that you bring this up during those conversations and put people on the spot. So that's my soapbox for the morning.
Soapbox, and I'll let you've got expert statistics there, so I will let that stand. Let me just add a couple things though. But before anything gets drowned out, there's ambiguity here. There's no question there's ambiguity, and it needs to be better explained. And I can at least do my part and commit to digging into that and making sure that it's this moratoriums were put out. We weren't sure the moratoriums. We don't know what is going to take place once those time limits, and some of them have already, you know, kind of transpired. We need some clarity on what's expected here, particularly with the 30 by 30. I mean, the federal government owns 28% of all the land in so here, a fun fact, 28% of all the land in US, in the Deb Haaland bill last year, in the US, right? So 20% of the land in the US. So Secretary Haaland's bill last year said that currently only 12% is protected, and her definition lists monuments and wilderness as a standard for protection. So by that standard, the U.S. would need to set aside 100% of all federal land as wilderness, and would still fall to 2% short of that 30% metric or threshold. So again, I'll just highlight there's ambiguity here, and we need to dig into that and clarify it. I appreciate the push to, you know, to hold accountable or highlight as best as we can, using any type of hearing or discussion to do so. And we'll see as more information comes out about this and what the ultimate, you know, strategic plan is, but ambiguity exists.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with you. I'm pretty active in these areas, and good luck with your first term.
Thank you, and I very much welcome your willingness to provide input. We're all ears.
Well, thank you, Congressman Moore, for your perspective, and we look forward to working with you into your first term here. And don't be afraid to call on us if you need some help, and
I
we'll do the
appreciate it.
same.
Thanks for the opportunity today.
Our next speaker is Senator John Hoven. He was sworn in as North Dakota's 22nd U.S. Senator, following 10 years of service as the state's governor. The senator's work includes serving as a leading advocate for approving the Keystone XL pipeline and advancing measures that will eliminate outdated and unnecessary regulations that are prolonging the approval process, discouraging investment and innovation. In addition, as a member of both the Agricultural Committee and the Conference Committee that negotiated the 2014 Final Farm Bill, Hoven played a crucial role in crafting and passing a long-term farm bill that provides the nation's producers with the certainty they need to plan for the future, as well as new tools to manage risk with enhanced crop insurance. The senator continues to work to make sure the Farm Bill is implemented in a timely and effective way. I want to welcome Senator Hoven to the Legislative Conference for PLC. And Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me all right?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Well, thanks very much for inviting me. More importantly, thanks for the work that you do. When it comes to our public lands, I'm a very strong supporter of multiple use. As you said, I am on the Ag Committee and also on the Energy Committee. In the Senate, actually, I am ranking member on Ag Appropriations, and I'm second ranking member on the Full Ag Committee. So Ag's always number one with me. And then Energy, I've been on the Energy Committee now since I came here in 2011. And our state of North Dakota has become an energy powerhouse for the country. I worked on that very diligently as governor for 10 years, from 2000 to 2010, and have worked on it for the past decade as well. We produce energy from all sources, really, except for nuclear energy. And that means traditional sources like oil and gas, coal-fired electric. We are the second largest, something probably a lot of people don't know, is we are the second largest oil producing state in the nation, second only to the state of Texas. We produce well over 1 million barrels a day. We've been as high as 1.5 million barrels a day. We're somewhat under that right now for a variety of reasons, but it's going back up. And like I say, also incredible amount of natural gas. We don't even drill for natural gas. It just comes as a byproduct of our oil development, and our challenge is getting it to markets, which is why we need gathering systems and transmission pipelines to do it. We also need electrical lines because we produce coal-fired electricity for much of the Midwest. And then we do the whole gamut of renewables too, including biofuels like ethanol and biodiesel, as well as a lot of wind and so forth. So we're both, and we also have the two working together, traditional and renewable sources as well. And so we're also really a leader in the whole environmental aspect as well. Things like carbon capture, for example, and we're implementing that both on our coal-fired electric plants and we're also on ethanol plants. And because we started putting the regulatory and the legal framework in place to do it, when I was governor back in about 2009, we started that, or we actually put it through the legislature. We are one of only 2 EPA approved states that are able to do it. So for example, right now there's a company, Summit Ag, that's working to actually build a pipeline from ethanol plants in the Midwest, in Minnesota, in Iowa, in South Dakota, and actually bringing that CO2 from their ethanol plants up to North Dakota, where we can put it down whole for carbon capture and storage, which just enhances the, reduces the carbon footprint of those biofuels and gives them extra, better price and extra marketing power. And of course, like I say, we're really working to crack the code and do the same thing on our coal-fired electric plants. We have a large gasification plant that already does that. With 50% of its stream, it captures the CO2 and actually puts it down whole for secondary oil recovery in the Weyburn oil fields in Canada. So we're working forward on all of those energy development aspects, and that involves both private land and our public lands. And of course, that's one of the reasons we're very concerned about this administration's moratorium on producing energy on public lands. We think that's the wrong way to go. And we are concerned about them not only limiting our ability for multiple use on federal lands, but also the heavy hand of regulation, which they are advocating as well. And we'll continue to push back on that. Agriculture has always been and will always be not only my #1 push and the thing I support more than almost anything you can think of on a daily basis, work on it all the time, but also is #1 in North Dakota and will always be #1 in North Dakota. I like to start out talking about agriculture as this isn't just about farmers and ranchers. Agriculture benefits every single American every single day with the highest quality, lowest cost food supply. Every single day, every single American benefits from what we do in agriculture. And it's important that people understand that because they go to the grocery store and they see that wonderful variety of everything they could possibly want. But I don't know that they always think about all the farmers and ranchers that work very hard every day to make it happen. And we do agriculture, both crops and animals on, or certainly crops on private land, but animals on both private and public land as well. In the grasslands, we have a lot of grazers, and we have to work very hard on those issues to make sure that our ranchers are fairly treated. And again, that's why it's so important that we all support multiple use out there. Some of those ranchers have been on the grasslands for generations. And so it's very important that they're treated fairly and well. And I think there's no better stewards of the land than our farmers and our ranchers. People should really, really value the fact that we have those ranchers out there on places like the grasslands that practice not only outstanding animal husbandry, but husband the resource and take care of the land, and nobody cares about it more than they do. So, you know, that's the view that I certainly bring to the public lands issue. We also have wonderful parks. Our Teddy Roosevelt National Park is truly a gem. If you haven't been to Medora, you need to come. It's absolutely fantastic. I worked very hard on the Restore Our Parks Act to get funding out there to help make sure that we preserve, maintain, and enhance our wonderful national parks as well. And so whether it's hiking, biking, camping, canoeing, fishing, hunting, all of which I like, particularly the fishing and hunting, as well as ag and energy, we need that multiple use access on our federal lands, and we need to support it for the benefit of everybody. So that's probably a longer speech than I actually intended to give you, but I'll stop there. And if there is a question, I'd be happy to answer it, although I'm guessing y'all would probably rather go have some lunch instead. But again, thanks for all the great work you do, and thanks for inviting me to be with you.
Well, Senator Hoeven, thank you for all of the work you do and for joining us today and your lunch hour as well. I know that you're between a few things here, but thank you for taking the time and for the work you do across the variety of committees. And the first question coming in this morning is really about all of those different committees, those different roles you have. When you deal with an issue, and I think you see this across, you know, whether it's a farm bill issue or whether it's a forestry or a grassland issue or rangeland issue, how do you, from a strategic perspective, how do you approach your different committee memberships to address issues that go across all of them, whether it's forestry or wildfire? Do you divide and conquer those committees, or do you try to bring all of the committees along at the same time? What's your favorite approach?
You know, Caitlin, I think you have to pick things that first you have to, as I laid out, you know, you have your approach, and on the public lands, mine is multiple use. And so your question's right on from the standpoint that there's a variety of committees then that all affect that, right? So you'd think, well, energy and natural resources would be primarily the committee that would deal with public lands. And that's true. And of course, I'm on that committee. But agriculture and all these others have a role to play as well. And so you have to make sure that you are working across committees. And a good example of how we're going to have to figure out how to do that, and it's not the same in every case, but you do have to coordinate. And my committee, the committees I'm on, is set up a little bit, as you may have noticed, to make sure I'm able to do that. Because then I'm also on the appropriations committee, and that's the funding side of everything we do in energy or in ag. So I'm also on appropes, and so that's the money side. So you got the authorizing side and the funding side, and then you got multiple committees that touch on the issue. And that's part of the reason I've structure my committee assignments that way so that I can do just exactly what you said. Now think about one of the big pushes, and I'm sure you all been talking about it today. This administration wants to do a lot on CO2 and climate. That's going to obviously affect the federal lands. You've already seen that, the public land. Well, the how there is really important. I'm willing to work with them if they do it the right way. It has to be voluntary. It has to be farmer friendly. It has to utilize new technologies. It has to enable us to have an all of the above energy policy. And if it does those things, we'll work with them. If they want to come in and get a one size fits all, a WOTUS-like approach, where it's not workable and it puts unfair burdens on our farmers or our energy producers or our ranchers, no. So that's why your question, and I think you're both asking a question and making a point, you got to work across all of them to make it happen, and that's right on.
Well, you do, and your role in appropriations is so important because you have a leadership role in the authorizing committee, but then you also have a voice in how much money is allocated to those priorities. I'm going to change gears a little bit. The next question we have coming in is about these grasslands, and it's not so much of a question rather than a statement, but thank you to you and to your staff and the rest of the delegations for working with the Forest Service to have an extension of the Forest Service range directives and comments. We appreciate that immensely. As a once in a generation, or really truly once in this generation opportunity to update those documents, it's been immensely helpful to have those extra days. Your grazing associations there in North Dakota, and we have we have staff from the Association of National Grasslands on as well. We really appreciate the work that you and your staff do every day for these grasslands. We know that there are challenging issues, even outside of prairie dogs.
Well, that's much appreciated, and we worked very hard to get recently also some deferred funding for their deferred maintenance. And we're right now set up a working group with the state and the counties and grazing associations so that they can actually get some state and hopefully maybe some county money as well, combined with the federal money that we'll get, so that we can actually go out and help our ranchers do more on the grasslands. That's good for the ranchers. That's good for the grasslands. And so, but thanks for that. And yeah, we got to keep working on it all the time. And then also making sure that those, again, back to not being over-regulated. Those folks out there know the land better than anyone and do a great job.
Oh, that's helpful. I don't see any other questions coming in the chat, so I'll turn it over to our immediate past president, Bob Skinner. But again, from a staff perspective, thank you, Senator Hoeven. And Bob, turn it back to you. It's always a little bit of a delay. It has to go all the way back to the West Coast there with Bob, since he is there with us in Oregon.
Okay, are you with me now?
We gotcha.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you, Senator Hoeven, for your presentation, and I want to tell you that one of your constituents is a good friend of mine, past president of Public Lands Council, Keith Winters, and also tell you that we had one of our conventions in Medora, and it was one of the memorable conventions we had with that outdoor theater. That's definitely something to experience, and definitely stuck in my mind. I've been there twice, and it's sure a memorable place. So again, thank you for your presentation and for your representation for us in Congress. Are there any other questions for the senator? Okay, if there's no further questions, we'll thank Senator Hoeven for joining us. We always appreciate the work you and your staff do for grazers in the Dakotas. So my next mission is I'm proud to introduce my representative from Oregon, Cliff Bentz, who joins us as our fourth and final speaker for today's session. Cliff is a third-generation Oregonian, raised on his family's cattle ranches in Harney County. Representative Bentz attended and graduated with a Juris Doctorate from Lewis and Clark School in Portland, Oregon in November 2020. Bentz was elected to represent Oregon's 2nd Congressional District. Oregon's 2nd Congressional District includes all or parts of 20 counties across northern, eastern, east central, and southern Oregon. Representative Bentz serves on the House Natural Resources Committee, and I will say at this point that is a very, very vital committee to Public Lands Council. And Congressman Bentz serves as a member in that, which is almost unheard for a freshman congressman. So as a longtime friend, 3 generations deep friendship in our 2 families. So I would like to welcome Cliff Bentz. Cliff, the floor is yours.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. And thanks to the council for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I've just left my Indigenous Peoples Subcommittee meeting so I could attend and speak with you this morning. At least it's still morning here. So just a few words about the committees I was fortunate to be placed on. I am on, of course, as Bob mentioned, the Natural Resource Committee. The 2 subs that I'm on are the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife sub, where, as Bob mentioned, I am a ranking member. There's 24 of us, I think. I'm not exactly sure I've got the exact number, but there are 10 Republicans and 14 Democrats on the committee. As ranking member, I have an opportunity to speak at the beginning of each meeting, just following the chair, and then I get to go first with my questions, which is very helpful in that kind of space. I'm also, as I just mentioned, on the Indigenous Peoples sub, and that's of great interest to me given long-term relationships with the tribes here in Oregon and the importance of Native people across the United States. So I'm looking forward to participating in that committee. I'm also on Judiciary, which was actually my 3rd choice behind Transportation Infrastructure. I was not successful in getting on that committee. There were, I think, 24 of we freshman Republicans that asked for positions on that committee. So no surprise, I was put on Judiciary, but I was very fortunate in being put on 2 subcommittees on Judiciary, the Intellectual Property Subcommittee and the Antitrust Subcommittee. The Antitrust Subcommittee has taken up a great deal of time in focusing on the large tech firms and whether or not they should be broken up. An extremely interesting conversation, and one that is relevant across the board when it comes to monopolies in the United States. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. And in fact, just spent several hours again this morning trying to become more conversant in the antitrust area. The something that's probably challenging for all of us to understand right now is the crazy amount of bills that are being passed in Congress. And I say crazy because the bills that are being passed are those that were heard in the last session, didn't make it through, and now are coming through in the first couple of months of this session without what we would call normal process. That means they go through rules briefly and then to the floor. And that's been happening over and over again, whether it's gun type bills, or whether it's voting bills, or whether it's bills having to do with spending huge amounts of money. And by the way, on the $1.9 trillion so-called rescue package, there are many things in that bill, which, by the way, I agreed with. There are many others that I don't. And I'll just say that one of the oddest things that I found in Washington, D.C. is this new thought that we can spend money without worrying about where it comes from. And as we approach 30 trillion in total debt, you have to wonder, you just have to wonder, where are we going with this, and who's going to ultimately pay it back? Which brings me very nicely to estate taxes and to higher taxes all around. The Biden administration is apparently at this point contemplating raising the estate tax. I think they're actually crafting that right now. They're going to be raising income taxes. I think the numbers I've heard are back up to close to 40% on incomes over 400,000. And then the, of course, taxes on corporations, which I understand will go from somewhere around 20% back up to around 28%, 21% to 28%. These taxes at this time would appear to be, having spent, excuse me, they appear to me to be targeted toward business in general. And I think there is one that's going to come into play when it comes to 1031 exchanges, a new tax. I think we're going to see a new capital gains tax. And I think we're going to see in the estate tax side of things, doing away with the step up in tax basis. So there's all kinds of reasons for you to go talk to your lawyer. I am a lawyer. I did do estate planning for many, many years. I'm not trying to generate business for them or the accountants, but if ever there was a moment you should be talking to those kind of professionals, this is it. On the climate side of things, I would just say it appears that we're going to see a very aggressive move in the climate space. That's going to first be seen, I think, in the very large infrastructure bill that I think is being written as we speak. The numbers I've been hearing run from $1 trillion to $4 trillion on the infrastructure side. I'm a Republican, so I'm not involved in those discussions. So who knows how much or for what. I will share with you that Jared Huffman, the chair of my subcommittee on water, oceans, and wildlife from Northern California, set up our first meeting of that particular committee with a focus on climate and adaptation to warmer, hotter, drier. And said to me as we were talking about it, as he was sharing with me what his plans were for that particular hearing, that he anticipated this would be a hearing to, quote, set the table, end quote, for funding under the new infrastructure bill. I asked him how soon we could anticipate seeing that bill, and he said sometime within the next couple of months. So how they're going to pay for it is unclear. It's no one has much enthusiasm for a gasoline tax, even though it hasn't been raised since sometimes back in, I want to say 1993, but I don't think that's where they're going to go. But that means where is the money going to come from? We're going to find out. There's some discussion about a carbon tax, which is not much different than a gasoline tax. We'll see. On the water end of things, my focus has been to try to talk to people about directing some of this infrastructure package toward water and water improvements, and we'll just have to see how that works out. There's so much going on in the political side of things that suggests we'll see a transportation package put together without much Republican input. And again, that has a lot to do with my observation of how the 1.9 trillion so-called rescue package passed without almost any Republican input. I do want to mention briefly Congressman Simpson's suggestion that the 4 dams on the lower Snake River be breached. Congressman Simpson is a good friend of mine now. I've worked with him just on a few things in the last couple of months. I've sat down in his office. He invited me over to look at this program, and I must say it was it's really quite the idea. He spent about 3 years putting it together. I oppose, of course, taking out dams because they're pretty important to anybody that uses water for such things as irrigation and cities and other folks that rely on water. So, but I've told everybody that I'll be happy to listen to whatever the ideas might be. And I've spent an amazing amount of time so far just listening on this particular dam removal issue. I'm happy to talk about it at length, but I know we have a limited amount of time today, so I won't go into it in any detail. I will tell you, I've also worked on the treaty between Canada and the United States in the past, and I've spoken to the State Department folks, reached out to them to try to hear what they have in mind to finalize that treaty. It's extremely complicated, and it will have a significant impact on our ability to store water in the United States behind such dams as Grand Coulee and others, if that treaty is not worked out. The Canadians are in a position to threaten not to store the 1/3 of the Columbia runoff that they now store if we don't work out an arrangement. And that would mean that reservoirs in the United States would have to be drafted in anticipation of a flood that may never come, but then you don't have water for the summer. So those kinds of allocations of risk are going on in that space, and I'll be continuing my involvement in those discussions. On the judiciary side of things, just to hop back to it just for a moment, there was some folks asking what was going to happen with the meat packing end of things and whether or not antitrust discussions would extend to them. The short answer is I don't know. I haven't heard or had the opportunity to talk to Chair forgot his name. It'll come back to me in a minute, of that particular committee. On our side of things, the chair in that space, Ken Buck, I have not talked to either Congressman Buck about whether or not cattle packing will come up, or for that matter, any kind of meat packing. And so with that, I have about 6 or 8 minutes left. I'm happy to take questions. If there are any, I will just say, share with you the opportunity to represent my CD2 in Congress is a lifetime goal of mine. I think Greg Walden did a wonderful job. I was extremely surprised when he decided to step down, but I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity to represent the folks that use public lands across the United States. So with that, I'll stop and happy to take questions.
Well, Representative Bentz, we are so pleased to have you there to represent not only your delegation or your constituency in Oregon, but to be part of the larger Western delegation on these issues. We heard this morning from 2 members of 2 fellow freshmen, also members of the Natural Resources Committee, and we asked them, questions came in for both of them, and so we'll ask you the same. Certainly, the Natural Resources Committee got off to a bit of a rocky start during the organizational meeting first, but how have you seen the dynamics progress so far? Has there been an increased focus on bipartisanship, or do you think that there is going to be an increasing challenge in some of these lands issues as the Congress goes on?
Well, I think it depends entirely upon what the Democrats suggest. So if the suggestions are under the guise of climate change to reduce our ability to store water or to redirect water under the Endangered Species Act, or do those kinds of things in the water arena, things aren't going to go well. If the focus instead is on adaptation and how we can store more water, how we can more efficiently use water, how we can start looking at other sources of water, things will go really well. We'll see. On the forest side of things, which is terrifically important, we have to see what the suggestions are there. And again, the water sub is going to be involved because watersheds are forest driven, if you will. So we're going to see, again, maybe a better way to put it is, are we going to see arrangements that actually get us back in trying to fix some of the problems that have grown up literally over the past 80 years? Or are we just going to argue over all of the barriers that seem to that have been developed? I keep thinking of the Endangered Species Act, but there are others, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, those things that are extremely difficult to get around. So the question is going to be, are the Democrats going to help reduce the amount of fuel load in those spaces, or are they going to be obstructionist? And that'll depend, and that'll take us where the committee is going to go, or tell us where the committee is going to go really fast.
I appreciate that, and appreciate those sentiments as well. We know that ESA is not only an issue in your district, but in those across the West as well. I'm turning it over to one of your constituents this morning, Matt McElligott. Matt, I think you're unmuted.
Yep. Can you hear me all right?
We gotcha.
Okay, Representative Bentz, thank you for joining us this morning. Thanks for representing Oregon. Couple of questions for you. You touched briefly on that. We've been talking about this morning quite a bit. On wilderness designations, so wilderness designations in Oregon, there's a couple bills on the table, the Owyhee Wilderness Bill and then the River Democracy Act. And so both of those combined, we're looking at over 4 million additional acres of wild and scenic in Oregon. Now, the difference between the two, the Owyhee Wilderness Bill, which you're familiar with, was drafted with a lot of representatives at the table, from environmental activist groups to grazers and friends of ours here in Oregon. So they were able to sit at the table and hash that thing out and kind of forestall a monument designation and still have some grazing within that bill and some protections within that bill, roads and fire access and so forth. Different from the River Democracy Bill, which has come out with Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley signing off on. So that bill takes in an additional 3 million acres, which they want to designate under the Wild and Scenic River Act. And I've met with their representatives for Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley and talked with them about that and trying to get specifics about that bill. There's a lot in there that kind of gives me heartburn. One is the setbacks, increasing the stream reach setbacks from the high water mark from 1/4 of a mile to 1/2 a mile. And that takes, again, then if you add that up at 4,700 miles of stream, that's over 3 million acres to be protected. So the part of that is there is talk in there on protecting current leases, which include grazing, but how those areas are monitored and how they are managed is not clear. And there's very little detail in the bill as far as the cost of it. It's a $30 million annual bill that goes on forever, and very little detail in there on what that $30 million is going to be used for. There's also a lot of talk in there on fire resiliency and how by doing this, it'll make these communities, these areas better fire resilient and resistant. But there's really no talk in that bill about how that's going to happen. Another thing in there that I mentioned with Wyden and Merkley's people is they're going to classify all these streams and stream reaches and give themselves 6 years to do it. Until that happens, those stream reaches will not be under the management of this act, but they will be under the management of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And if they don't get those stream reaches classified in 6 years, then what happens? So as I read that bill, there's a lot of unknowns in it. And I've also asked these people to give us, public lands grazers, a seat at the table so that we can talk through these issues. This bill just kind of seems like it popped up out of nowhere. And it's kind of getting rammed down our throats. I don't know any other better way to say that. So I would like, if you have any input on that, is to slow it down and at least give us a seat at the table so we could sit down and talk through what we need from public lands grazers, what we can do for fire resiliency by grazing, carbon sequestration by grazing, thinning underbrush, by grazing. So I guess that's more of a, not much of a question, but more of my input on that.
Well, Matt, thank you for the input. I did not have the 3 million acre number. I would just say that what's happening in my space is a realization that we can't stop anything in the House, generally speaking. At least we haven't been able to so far. And so that means our focus is going to have to be on the Senate. And to that end, I have been working with, if that's the right word, reaching out to the senators who share our concerns about these kinds of land grabs, because that's what they are, and they're they're everything political and very little rational. So the question is, how do we respond? And the answer is, you go to the other people that are playing in the Senate and you do your best to figure out a way of making sure it doesn't get put into the wrong reconciliation package, and you hope that we don't end up having the rules change where the filibuster goes away, because if it does, a lot of this stuff is going to happen no matter what we do. I don't know the right word for this. I guess disappointed is the best word in how these things happen. But the best way we can approach them right now is to stop them from happening, or at least be able to do it, and then force some discussion. So that's what I'll be doing in DC.
Right. Yep, and that's all I ask is if you can give us a little pressure there in DC from your counterparts representing us here in Oregon. I've already asked from the public land standpoint here in Oregon that we need to sit down and talk through this, because there's these stream reaches that they have mapped out. They're interspersed, and there's private lands interspersed in there. So there'll be from Forest Service management, BLM management to management under Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to private land management, a checkerboard approach throughout. So I think I'd like to sit down and say, okay, this stream makes sense, this one doesn't, because of how the land agencies lay out and intersperse with private land, whether they're a seasonal stream or run year round and so forth. But so I had posed a lot of questions to Kathleen, Kathy, and Jessica that represents Merkley on natural resource, and they're yet to get back with me, but they said that it would get back with me with those answers. But again, I just asked for, let us as public lands users, natural resource users, not just grazers, but foresters, miners, and so forth. Let's sit down at the table, and if we can't stop this thing, give us a voice in implementing it and managing.
Well, we'll do our best to generate some leverage, and it's going to be in the Senate, though. Although I don't want to undersell, we have some limited help in the House. So the reason it's hard to gauge what's going to happen in the House right now is because so many of the bills that are coming through were coming through for political posturing purposes, for setup purposes. I would hope that these bills are not those kinds of bills, but we'll find out.
Okay, thank you.
So I better take one more question and then go back to my Indigenous lands meeting if we have one more question.
Okay, Congressman, apparently you've satisfied everybody's questions for today. Probably as normal, when we get away from here, they'll say, oh, shoot, I should have asked. But thank you for your time. Thank you for everything you do for us.
You're very, very welcome. Have a good meeting.